Well, hello there, you beautiful, beautiful, amazing, wonderful people, you. I hope you are all well on this wonderful, wicked midweek hump. It's not even midday. It's like 8:53 in the AM. 8:53 in the AM, not even afternoon. I'm wishing the day away. You're looking absolutely amazing. You must be having a good day. Anyway, we're going to get straight into the meat and potatoes. As in this video here, we're going to be going over one of the latest videos from Tony Brueski, the pro-guilter. Look, I got nothing bad to say about Tony Brueski, not at the moment anyway, because I've not seen this entire video. I just started watching it. I thought, you know what? He seems like the sort of person who is the aforementioned pro-guilter, and we need to look at what he's saying and see whether there is any credibility to it. Because look, as I keep saying to people, I am not one of these people who completely removes the possibility from my brain that Brian Kohberger could be guilty of this crime. I'm just not, even though loads of people seem to fucking forget that. But what I am saying categorically is that, A, he's not being treated fairly. Absolutely not. And there has been things that have happened around this trial that goes absolutely against his constitutional rights, because he is and he should be able to get a fair trial. That's as simple as that. And he has been tried in the public space and he's been decimated. And he is yet to be proven guilty of the crime. And a lot of the evidence that's out there is questionable. And that's as simple as that. That's my stance on it. But I am well aware that things could change as time progresses and it could be proven beyond a reasonable doubt that he did it. But I just hope that this trial isn't just the evidence that we've seen with some things pinned into it, like looking at his past and what he did when he was 6, when he, I don't know, pissed on a cat or something. Who knows? But let's look at Tony Brueski. For those of you who don't know who Tony Brueski is, it's this guy here. This guy. This is Tony Brueski. And Tony Brueski is, again, he is someone who believes that Brian Kohberger is guilty. Now, before I get into it, please do bear with me, because I obviously have to stop the video periodically through it and offer commentary over the top for the sake of fair use. And I know it can be frustrating, I know it can be annoying, but that is not just what we have to do on because of YouTube laws and rules. That is the actual law. So we have to do it. So if you don't like that sort of thing, this video may not be for you. But let's get into it. What do you got for us, Tony Brueski?
You know that moment, that very specific moment when someone gets caught red-handed and suddenly develops an elaborate explanation for why everything is actually someone else's fault? There's a lot of cases like that right now. I can think of Karen Reed. I can also
putting the boot in on Karen straight away. Putting the boot in on old poor Karen Reed. So he's going to get people ticked off straight away, isn't he? Because I'm betting there's a lot of people who feel that Karen Reed is being turned over. And look, I ain't really watched the Karen Reed case. I did it the first time round, but not the second time round. But from what I can see of that case, that is somewhat of a shit show. But he's straight in there with Karen Reed's clearly guilty. So that's what we're dealing with.
of Brian Kohberger, where this case, you have a defense that has transformed a straightforward murder prosecution into what they're dramatically calling a constitutional crisis. But what looks more like standard defense attorney theatrics when your client's case isn't looking particularly strong.
So they're saying that their case isn't looking particularly strong, but it's not their case. This is the first issue that I would bring up with Tony here. This isn't about the defense's case being strong. The defense are defending a case, so it's the prosecution who brings a case, and the defense looks at that case, and then they defend it. The issue that we have is that the case that's coming to them, there's still, to this day, I think it was literally a few hours ago, another request for discovery. So they're still requesting discovery at this stage. We're well into the mid-20s of requests for discovery. And what we've seen in the public arena, there is a lot of evidence, should we say, that is questionable because it seems to be incomplete, and it's being called out as incomplete by industry professionals, such as the cellular data being called out by Ray, someone with close to 30 years experience and having handled billions of calls. And then you've got Bicker Barlow in the world of DNA who has raised issues with the DNA. So look, this isn't straightforward, and this isn't about the defense's case. This is about the prosecution's case. And let's not forget that we also have a situation right now where we have leaks of information being put out to media, and you have to ask yourself, if these leaks are coming from law enforcement or they're coming from the prosecution, which that seems to be the case, then what is the reasoning behind that? When you know what the ramifications likely are, to me, the only thing that makes any sense is that they know that the ramifications could be a collapse of the entire case, and that's what they want. Because it's better to have a collapse of the case than to have things potentially addressed at trial. That's how it looks, and that's the only thing that makes sense if these leaks are coming from the other side of the fence. But let's get back to Tony and see what Tony has to say.
Over the past 2 weeks, we've watched Kohberger's legal team demonstrate the time-honored tradition of what's affectionately called throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks, turning an NBC Dateline episode into grounds for delaying justice, and spinning routine pretrial publicity into claims of fundamental unfairness that would make seasoned prosecutors roll their eyes. The central drama revolves around Judge Stephen Hippler dealing with an information leak to NBC's Dateline that aired on May 9th. The broadcast featured records from Kohberger's phone, including internet searches, Amazon purchase histories, Instagram photos, and cell phone tower data. Now, was this leak problematic? Yeah. Absolutely. The judge doesn't like it. Does it constitute the defense apocalypse that they're claiming? That's where things get interesting, and where we need to separate legal maneuvering from actual procedural problems.
So look, in one hand, he's turning around. He's obviously acknowledging the fact that this Dateline thing went out. And is it problematic? Now, he turns around and says, yes, it's problematic. It's problematic. And then he caveats that with, well, Judge Stephen Hippler isn't happy about it. But it boils down to that, isn't it? Is it problematic? Yes, it's problematic. There shouldn't be any caveat to that whatsoever. You've got a gag order around this case, and even still, as frustrating as it is, it's the rules of the court. The court have made this decision to gag it. They've put a non-dissemination order in there, and that has to be adhered to. When you question, why is this gag order even in existence then? And they will turn around and say, well, the gag order exists because it protects the integrity of the trial and further enables the accused to have a fair trial. Because if some things are leaked, you can see happen to them what is happening to information that is being leaked. You're seeing it happen firsthand. That's the entire issue here, isn't it? There is a gag order set in place because we know if there isn't a gag order and things go out into the public, they're going to get twisted. People are going to have access to this information. They're going to have not only access to the information, but they're going to have access to the information framed in the way that it's being framed. And for anyone who's around this area, and there is a real interest in this, which is likely to be the very people who could be picked as juror members, they will have seen this framed information, and it will affect them. It will affect them. However much you want to pretend that it won't, it will. It will. I know that some people say, well, in the grander scheme of things, the the million plus people versus the entire United States is only a small pool of people. But we're talking about what I'd like to see what the impact was locally, what the people around this trial and who are interested in this trial, how that looks in terms of jury selection. Because I would say that the jury selection is going to be the main affected pool of people. That's most likely going to be the case here. Is that the people who could be picked as jurors are more than likely going to have been affected by this Dateline NBC documentary and how that was framed. Framed being the right terminology there, I feel. But let's continue.
Responded by ordering both sides to preserve records and identities of who might have had access to leaked information. His language about wanting to find anyone who leaked to news organizations or anyone else suggests he's taking this seriously. But judges investigate information breaches regularly, keep in mind, without trails or trials grinding to a halt. The fact that he immediately moved to preserve evidence and identify sources shows a judge who knows how to handle media without accepting defense claims that the sky is falling.
See, I would argue that here because again, this leaking of information and people going onto the internet, for instance, and making these claims has been going on for months and months, since pretty much the beginning of this trial. And we know that Stephen Hitler was looking at the likes of YouTube and other social media sites because he has referenced them consistently. So he is well aware of the likes of Steve Gonsalves, for instance, who has been out in the public and making the statements and claims that he has. So I would say that Stephen Hitler hasn't handled this very well. It's just gotten to a point where he has had to address it because it's got so bad. That Dateline situation was an explosion of information that shouldn't have been released and certainly shouldn't have been released in the manner that it was, because it can be problematic, which Tony Brueski, has accepted. Yes, it's problematic. And it shouldn't be problematic. We're talking about an accused person yet to be proven guilty that could face a trial, that the evidence is purely circumstantial evidence, which then falls into the realms of how is that circumstantial evidence framed? And that can have a huge impact and influence on the jury. Because it's not about factual information. This is this, this is this. This then becomes, this could be this could be that. Do you know what I mean? And when you're talking about someone's life based on could-be's and maybes, but framed in a certain way that people are then further influenced, then that's where the problematic element comes from. And I don't think this is about theatrics. This is about understanding that this has now happened, and there is going to be... It's no different than when Independence Day came out, the film Independence Day. The amount of people who then claimed to see UFOs in the sky rose astronomically, sightings of UFOs. And that was because of the influence of that film. And you have to allow time to progress so that effect on the public then subsides. It's just cause and effect. There we go.
What's particularly telling is how quickly the defense pivoted from damage control to opportunity. On May 21st, they filed a motion to delay the August trial, arguing that the Dateline special created such a toxic media environment that fair proceedings are now impossible. The motion reads like a greatest hits compilation of defense arguments, complete with references to constitutional violations and systematic information failures. The defense claims this creates a pretrial publicity paradox, a PPP for short, because the show emphasized how secret the information was while broadcasting it. But here's the reality. Competent prosecutors deal with pretrial publicity constantly. The legal system has developed robust mechanisms over decades specifically to address these concerns. Voir dire questioning allows attorneys to identify and exclude jurors who've been influenced by media coverage, and jury instructions provide clear guidance about what evidence to consider. The motion also references an upcoming book scheduled for release mid-July, suggesting this represents part of a broader pattern of information violations. However, this argument lacks foundation. Books about high-profile cases get written constantly, often based on publicity available that's out there. Public available court documents, media reports, and independent journalism. The mere existence of a book doesn't prove gag order violations any more than the existence of true crime documentaries proves procedural misconduct.
Again, I'm kind of caught here because this is about this. However much you want to, how can I say, bullshit baffles brains. Like Tony is clearly coming from a position where he feels that Brian Kohberger is guilty of this crime. So the entire way that he is framing this video is to point out that what has happened isn't that bad, and these sort of things happen all the time. But I would imagine that if you really dug into the many cases, especially real big cases, have they been influenced by pre-trial media coverage? Has the media coverage of any case influenced how cases have gone? And I would say that anybody who could turn around and say that that media influence on cases has never existed is pretty stupid. I would go that far. You know, our country, we fail at a lot of things, but the UK will come out and they will warn media not to speak, and they will say that you will be in contempt of court should you say anything that could be deemed as prejudicial to the accused person, and that go on to affect the ability for this individual to obtain a fair trial. And again, however much we want to spin that, that's the question. The question at the heart of everything should be, has what's happened potentially affected this individual? I don't give a fuck about any other case, because every single case should be looked at on its own merit. Brian Kohberger and how his case is going shouldn't be affected by how someone else's case went, because there's no relevance. There's absolutely no fucking relevance whatsoever. No relevance whatsoever. It should be looked at on its individual basis and look at what is happening around it and decide whether what is happening around it could affect his ability to obtain a fair trial. And again, I go back to Tony Brueski's first statement around, was it problematic? Yes, it was problematic. That was his words. Now, if I was to say to him, okay, Tony, why do you think that was problematic? Now, he will likely turn around and say, well, it's problematic because it gives the defense a window to exploit that issue. But if this wasn't an issue, there would be nothing to exploit. Of course, the defense are going to exploit a window that they are given to exploit because they exist. And the reality is pre-trial publicity, when it is so heavily biased and information is being leaked out and framed in specific ways, it will have a detrimental effect on the accused ability to obtain a fair trial. And I don't think that can be argued. I don't think it can be argued at all. Now, let me know down below what you think, and subscribe if you're not already subscribed to the channel.
The defense's alternative perpetrator theory represents perhaps the most ambitious aspect of their strategy thus far. They've submitted what's called an order of proof regarding an alternative perpetrator, which Judge Hippler immediately sealed. More significantly, he demanded that they provide whatever actual evidence you have that supports those allegations rather than just allegations by May 23rd. Just this judicial response tells us everything we need to know about the court's initial assertion of these claims. Alternative perpetrator defenses face enormous evidentiary hurdles in capital cases. Courts require concrete evidence pointing towards specific individuals with means, motive, and opportunity.
Now, what we do know is there is a hearing on the 18th of June now, where this is being looked at with some degree of seriousness. Obviously, it is in the courts. It is being sealed from the public, so we won't get to hear what is said about it. But when they turn around and say that this is, what you've got to think of here is Brian Kohberger is accused of this crime. So at this point, he has not been proven guilty of this crime. I think that everybody should be able to the majority of people then should be able to say Brian Kohberger has not been proven beyond a reasonable doubt to have done this crime at this point. Some people will have seen what they've seen, which the caveat to that is that the vast majority of people who are likely in the position of feeling that Brian Kohberger has been proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, if you was to say, okay, what makes you think that, you can bet your bollocks to a barn dance that they will come back and likely quote the likes of NBC Dateline and information that was brought to you by that documentary, which proves Tony Brueski wrong here, because it's showing that people are influenced to the point of believing that Brian Kohberger is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt already, and he's not even entered the courtroom. But if we step back and look at alternative perpetrator theory, when you look at what we know, it wouldn't take a lot to bring alongside Brian Kohberger someone with just as much being pointed at him. Remember, we have DNA at the scene of this crime that we currently don't know anything about, and it would seem that there was a protection order of some degree over it. We just know that there's DNA that hasn't gone the whole 9 yards. In the court documentation, it has been suggested that that was halted and stopped because Brian Kohberger was given, the FBI said, this is the guy. Ignore all that other stuff and look at this guy. But we've got DNA at the scene in at least two very precarious, I'd argue 3 precarious situations, and that is one on the handrail going down towards the front door, and then we learn that the front door was open. We also have a glove outside, which you would kind of believe that the person who did this crime likely had a glove on. And we also have DNA underneath the fingernails of one of the victims as well. So we have DNA at the scene of the crime. So if you've got DNA from an individual that is questionable and you can form enough questions around that individual, they're seen in the area, they're known to be in the area at the time of the crime, they can say that there was issues with the victims, they can tie in a situation that is problematic, such as an earlier fight or threats of violence or nefarious connections on the peripheral of. Before you know it, you end up with Brian Kohberger. Yes, circumstantially, there's some things that he's got in terms of hurdles, but if you've got another individual with just as many, then look, especially if you can get cell data and place this individual within a certain distance of this home as well on the night that this happened, because we know that they did a dragnet of 3,800 phones. And currently they are not placing Brian Kohberger at the property at the scene of the crime. They are in fact placing him away from the property at the scene of at the time of the crime. So look, I wouldn't rule out or boo-poo the alternative perpetrator theory just yet, because you are very likely going to find out that it's not hard to find someone who is as dodgy looking as Brian Kohberger. But we shall see. Time will tell. But he is right in what he's saying, that they do face huge hurdles to overcome. There will have to be some real solid evidence. But the fact that there's a hearing and the fact that it's going to be sealed would suggest that they have a name and they very likely have evidence. Now, is that evidence going to be more telling than the current circumstantial evidence around Brian Kohberger? Again, time will tell.
There's theories about how crimes might have occurred differently. The defense claims they have evidence suggesting two people committed the murders using multiple weapons, directly contradicting the prosecution's singular perpetrator narrative. They also indicate they're pursuing leads buried in thousands of investigative tips. The timing creates what the defense wants.
And just to touch on this very quickly, very quickly, the prosecution themselves have stated in court documents that the vast majority of what they have sent to the defense is irrelevant, which is indicative of burying the defense in irrelevant paperwork. Now, why would you do that? We want the evidence that suggests or supports your case against our client, and what they do instead is give them everything, and they know that it's irrelevant. If you know it's irrelevant, then why give them it? Why are you giving them it? That, again, is indicative of burying it. And we could go on. We could go on and argue all of these points, but they buried it. The prosecution buried a lot of information, and I question why.
Characterizing as a procedural crisis, but what actually reflects here is normal capital case management. With jury selection starting July 30th and the trial beginning August 11th, Hippler scheduled that June 18th hearing specifically for the alternative perpetrator evidence, which should be good. This prevents trials from getting derailed by surprise theories during proceedings. It's judicial administration, not crisis management. Judge Hippler's inquiry about plea deal status provides perhaps the most revealing insight into the case's trajectory. When he requested that the defense provide a declaration about any plea offers by late June or July, he was essentially asking whether negotiated resolution remains possible. This suggests recognition that the case is possibly headed toward conviction, with the real question being whether there's any path to avoid the penalty phase. The actual evidence driving these defense maneuvers deserves careful examination. Court documents, unsealed in March, revealed that Kohberger allegedly purchased that K-bar knife sheath and sharpener on Amazon approximately 8 months before the murders occurred. This timeline suggests premeditation rather than impulsive action.
But again, this is suggestive. But, you know, again, he, on one hand, Tony Brueski turns around and says, look, the evidence should be handled right. You know, it should go through the court process and be looked at properly and be concluded properly, and so that no stone is left unturned. But then straight away pivots to this suggestive nature of reporting. Talks about premeditation. We don't know anything about this purchase. We only know the skeletal structure of that story, and it's very, very simple to get rid of that as being problematic. Brian Kohberger could still have that sharpener, that sheath. We do not know. There may be a chain of custody for it that is easy to explain. Again, at this stage, we do not know, but until this goes, and this is why it's important to go through the trial setting to look at every single thing. And again, it should be the trial that determines guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, not pre-trial speculation and suggestive media propaganda by guilters.
Prosecutors argued this purchase history, combined with DNA evidence, allegedly links him to a knife sheath found at the crime scene. It creates a compelling narrative of deliberate preparation. The prosecution possesses what they described as a selfie photograph allegedly taken by Kohberger hours after the killing, showing facial features, particularly bushy eyebrows, that match descriptions provided by surviving roommates. While defense attorneys will challenge visual identification reliability, the evidence creates temporal connections that extend beyond the...
And again, the bushy eyebrow situation. Let's not forget, and I've stressed this multiple times, Dylan Mortensen didn't say bushy eyebrows until she was prompted to do so. We've seen interactions directly after she apparently saw this individual face to face. Literally, the only thing that she saw was the eyes of this individual. So, in someone who was proven to have an interest in eyes and eyebrows, and she would draw them, do you not think that had she have stared into the face of this individual and the eyebrows were prominent, that she would have raised that immediately? That would have been the first thing that she likely said to Bethany Funk during her first communication. I just saw someone with a fucking ski mask on with bushy eyebrows. It doesn't seem that bushy eyebrows came up until, what was it, interview 3? So to say that she has consistently stated that the individual that she saw was bushy eyebrowed, and that just happens to fall in line with Brian Koberger, is misleading. And on top of that, I will see whether he brings up the fact that she was unable to recognize Brian Koberger when shown a picture of him. And this is someone who she had stared into the eyes of. Again, important, because you can't have your cake and eat it. You can't say that she was drunk, she don't know what she was doing. She has herself said that she's basically unreliable, but the courts and prosecution deem that she is reliable because she has remained consistent throughout her reporting, yet her reporting seems to have not been consistent. It has been, however, led in a certain direction that has been framed in a certain way again.
Physical crime scene. The DNA evidence represents the prosecution's strongest asset. The knife sheath allegedly found at the crime scene reportedly contains what prosecution calls a statistical match to Koberger's DNA. When combined with the Amazon purchase showing him buying the exact knife type and sheath months earlier,
that is, again, presumptuous, because we don't know whether the knife sheath that was purchased on Amazon, whether A, he still has it, whether there is a chain of custody, as aforementioned, or it is indeed the exact same sheath, because they have left out very, very important information specific to the one that they claim was left at the scene of the crime and the one in the Amazon documentation, the USMC information specifically. So we do not know. And K-Bar themselves also, they do not just make the iconic K-Bar that when I say K-Bar, you see knife. They make multiple others as well. So we don't, even at this stage, know that any knife purchase was the same as what was used in this crime. And I noticed that earlier on as well, Tony Brueski spoke about the fact that there had been a nod to potential multiple weapons, multiple perpetrators. That wasn't the defense that even started that ball rolling. That was Kathy Mabbutt who started that ball rolling, and very closely after would be Steve Gonsalves again, with statements such as wounds not matching and going into specifics about the injuries. And if it's said in the court documentation that there are indicators that would suggest what they've suggested, and that is people being slain at the same time, would seem to suggest a break in DNA, movement between these victims. Is there an absence of DNA in that chain? Because if you've got one weapon and you've got one person, you'd have that DNA move to that person, those two DNAs then move to the third, those three then move to the fourth. That's what you should see. There should be a chain throughout these victims that would give them not only the order, but prove that there was one weapon used, one weapon, one individual. If there is an issue there, then it is an indicator, and it's an indicator that should be brought up, should be looked at, because it's important. And let's not forget as well that the family, Steve Gonsalves, Christy Gonsalves, have themselves seemingly suggested that they believe that the likelihood is that this is indeed a multiple perpetrator crime.
Creates a physical evidence chain connecting preparation to execution to post-crime behavior. And the autism spectrum disorder diagnosis introduces complexity that cuts both ways for the defense. Leads to the defense attorney, Ann Taylor, has noted that Koberger's flat affect piercing stare, stiffness, holding still during emotional testimony reflects his disability rather than callousness. However, this argument assumes jurors will interpret his behavior negatively in the first place and suggests the defense anticipates their client won't present well during proceedings.
But a very, very important point, and one that shouldn't be ignored. I think that anybody with half a brain really should accept that. We know, why do they think, the video that I did earlier, why do you think the media want photographers, etc. in there? How many times have you seen a picture taken as a single shot and then framed in a certain way? This has been the issue in this entire case. So it is important that how people look, how people are perceived, and that small snapshot, if he makes a face or if he makes a movement, people do look, they will be looking. The jury will likely be staring at this guy constantly. He will be under constant scrutiny in that room by every single person in there. People aren't going to be bothered about looking at Ann Taylor and what she looks like on the stand. They'll be looking at Brian Kohberger and how he looks and his reactions as different pieces of information come to light. So it is important to understand and make people aware if there is anything underlying that could impact the way that he reacts to certain things. It would be unfair to not bring that to light, and I will stand by that.
You think? Judge Hippler's ruling that the autism diagnosis doesn't preclude death penalty eligibility follows established legal precedent. Courts reject categorical explanations or exemptions based on disabilities unless there's clear Supreme Court guidance. The defense argument that jurors need this information during the guilt phase rather than just penalty phase suggests they're already planning damage control strategies. You have to
which they should do. You know, ultimately, the guy's fighting for his life, so that it would be stupid for them to not be preparing. When do you want them to prepare? When the fucking horse is bolted? Do you know what I mean? Closing the stable door after the horse is bolted. They need to have all of their ducks in a row by the time this goes to trial. So again, that is pretty much standard procedure for a defense team to make sure that even the absolute worst case scenario is being prepared for and they are ready to go with whatever needs to be gone with. So I like the way, again, Tony sort of frames certain things like it's not normal and then frames other things like it is normal. And it's
change as well from Moscow to Boise. It demonstrates that courts possess effective tools for addressing pretrial publicity. This relocation was granted specifically to ensure impartial jury selection, proving the judicial system has mechanisms for handling media attention without accepting claims that fair trials become impossible. The successful, vague challenge undermines defense arguments about media contamination making proceedings impossible. Trial logistics reveal normal capital case complexity rather than exceptional circumstances. Hippler.
Again, I would argue that purely because the size of this case, like I could look at Majorjan Alan Kayla case, for instance. Now, the vast majority of you guys won't even know who that is. Who is Majorjan Alan Kayla? He's another guy from Idaho who just happens to lose his shit over the fact that this family of four, one of the sons does something in front of his daughter that he doesn't like. He reports it to law enforcement who fail to do anything consistently. It then spirals out of control and he goes into this house and executes the entire family. But what have you heard about it? What do you know about it? Tell me something that you know about it. If you've heard about it, let me know down below. But this is a young man who walks into a house and executes an entire family of four. And I'm saying that the vast majority of you won't know a lot about it. You have to, again, take everything on its own merit. You look at everything on its own merit, the size of the trial, the size of the case, the amount of eyes on it, and the complexities of it in terms of what's the likelihood of people wanting retribution for this individual because of what they've seen in the media. It's as simple as that.
Proceedings will be live streamed with cameras focused on specific areas,
Yeah,
but
Brian
without
Koberger's face.
production elements. He agreed to shut down streaming when surviving roommates testify, balancing transparency with witness protection. The schedule extended through November 7th. Reflects typical capital case duration, not media-induced complications. The discovery volume, over 9,000 investigative tips and extensive evidence processing, indicates through police work rather than investigative failures.
Which, again, this is utter shite. Because, again, the volume is addressed within the court documentation, where the prosecution themselves deem the vast majority of that is irrelevant, which is, as aforementioned, indicative of burying the defense with irrelevant information to hide the weakness of the information that is there. If you've got a case, and it's a strong case, then just give that information to the defense team. What is the reasoning behind the burying of it in 52 terabytes of information? Now, he turns around and says that that is good policing. No, it's not. That's just going around and collecting all of the cameras from all of the area, saying, right, we go into all of these buildings and say, right, we want your camera footage from this date to this date. So they'll probably go a week or 2 weeks either side of these crimes, pull the whole lot in. They'll pick and choose what bits they find relevant to this crime, but then they'll give the fucking lot to the defense team rather than just giving them the bits that they feel are relevant to the strength of their case against their client. That's not good police work. That's fucking lazy work. That is, again, lazy at best, manipulative and underhanded at worst. And when you, again, look at the leak, which seems to be something that Tony is very, very happily breezing over the importance of, there has been a leak. And that leak came from somewhere, and it very likely came from law enforcement or it came from the prosecution. And I have to ask, why was it leaked? Now, this video is quite long. It's 45 minutes long, so I'm going to leave that here. If you want to see the rest of this, because we're about halfway through this, let me know down below, and I will go through the rest of this video and look at the rest of it with you. Love you all. Mwah.